Something crazy just happened to Jay Leno, but it was not the kind of crazy Hollywood usually understands. It was not a courtroom explosion, not a secret mistress, not a feud backstage, not one of those manufactured scandals that burn across the internet for 48 hours and then disappear like smoke. No, what happened to Jay Leno was quieter, stranger, and in many ways far more devastating. People were shocked that he stayed. After more than 4 decades of marriage to Mavis Leno, after fame, money, cars, late-night wars, applause, criticism, and the slow fading of television royalty, Jay found himself facing the one test no audience could laugh through: his wife's dementia. And when he spoke about it, the sentence that cut through everything was brutally simple. Someone asked him whether he was going to get a girlfriend now. Not because his marriage was over, not because Mavis had left, but because illness had entered the room, because memory had begun to disappear. Because the woman he married in 1980 was now living through advanced dementia, and Jay had been granted conservatorship over her estate in 2024 as her condition became more serious. For a man who spent decades controlling the rhythm of a room, this was the one room he could not control. Jay Leno built his life on timing. A pause here, a punchline there, a raised eyebrow, a clean exit before the joke turned stale. On The Tonight Show, timing made him powerful. Timing made him safe. Timing made him rich. But dementia has no respect for timing. It does not care whether a man was once watched by millions. It does not care how many vintage cars sit in a garage, how many presidents shook his hand, how many celebrities laughed on his couch, or how many headlines once called him the king of late night. Dementia enters slowly, then steals without apology. First, it takes small things. Then it takes names. Then it takes certainty. Then it turns a marriage into something both familiar and unrecognizable. And for Jay, the cruelest twist is that the woman he is protecting is not just his wife. She is the person who existed before the empire, before the television throne, before the industry decided who he was supposed to be. That is why the girlfriend question hit so hard. In another celebrity story, it might have sounded like gossip. Here, it sounded like a confession about Hollywood itself. Jay said people seem stunned when someone actually lives up to the vows they made. In sickness and in health is supposed to be the foundation, not the plot twist. Yet somehow, in a world where loyalty is often treated like bad branding, Jay's decision to stay became the surprising part. He did not present himself as a saint. He did not perform grief for applause. He said, in essence, that he is married, that Mavis is his partner, and that they are in this together. That answer was not dramatic because it was loud. It was dramatic because it exposed the emptiness around him. The crazy thing was not that Jay Leno stayed with his wife. The crazy thing was that anyone thought he would not. But to understand why this moment matters, you have to go back to the version of Jay Leno America thought it knew. For years, he was the dependable man behind the desk, the safe comedian, the one with the denim shirt, the garage, the massive chin, the monologue, the easy smile. He was never the mysterious artist hiding in shadows. He was not selling danger. He was selling familiarity. Millions of people ended their day with him because he made chaos feel manageable. Politicians could be mocked, celebrities could be teased, scandals could be softened into jokes, and the world could be packaged into a few minutes of laughter before sleep. Jay's greatest gift was not shock. It was steadiness. He became famous by making people feel that no matter what happened outside, the show would still begin, the jokes would still land, and Jay would still be there. Now, decades later, that same steadiness has moved from television to a hospital-like private reality. There is no band cue, no camera cut, no applause sign, just a husband facing the slow erosion of the person he loves. And that is where the story becomes heavier than any late-night controversy. Because in entertainment, people remember Jay for winning ratings battles, for replacing Johnny Carson, for the Conan O'Brien conflict, for the cars, for the clean jokes, for the image of a workaholic who never seemed to stop. But this chapter strips away the industry costume. It asks a more uncomfortable question. When the lights are gone, when the audience has moved on, when the person beside you can no longer stand in the same memory with you? Who are you really? Jay Leno's answer appears to be painfully simple. He is still the husband. Not the host. Not the brand. Not the millionaire collector. The husband. And maybe that is why this story unsettles people. Because loyalty sounds beautiful until it becomes inconvenient. Marriage vows sound romantic until one person becomes a caregiver. Love sounds easy until it must repeat itself every day without guarantee of being fully remembered. The public loves stories of devotion when they are polished and cinematic, but real devotion is often repetitive, exhausting, private, and invisible. It is making sure someone feels safe. It is answering the same question again. It is choosing patience when nobody is clapping. It is learning that the final act of love may not be passion, but presence. And for Jay Leno, presence has become the real headline. Not the shocking phrase, just now. Not the online rumor machine. Not some fake catastrophe dressed up for clicks. The real shock is that a man who once commanded the loudest room in television is now proving himself in the quietest room of his life. Mavis may not always be able to stand beside him the way she once did, but Jay is standing beside her. And in a culture addicted to replacement, that may be the most radical thing he has ever done. To understand the weight of Jay Leno's silence now, you have to understand the noise he survived before. Jay was never the comedian people described as fragile. He was not marketed as wounded, tortured, or poetic. He was the garage guy, the workhorse, the man who could do a set in a club, tape a show, shake hands with executives, walk into a room full of hostile critics, and still leave with the same grin. His power came from looking unbreakable. In Hollywood, that kind of image can become a prison. If you're known as the steady one, nobody asks what it costs you to stay steady. If you're known as the funny one, nobody knows what to do when your life stops being funny. In that is the hidden tragedy of Jay Leno's current chapter. The same world that watched him deliver jokes for decades now seems almost confused by the fact that behind the monologue was a man capable of old-fashioned loyalty. Mavis Leno was not a decorative figure in Jay's life. She was not just the wife of a famous host, waiting quietly in the background while cameras built his empire. She had her own convictions, her own public voice, and her own sense of purpose. For years, she was known for advocacy, especially for women's rights in Afghanistan, and those who followed her work understood that she was serious, intelligent, and deeply committed. That matters because it changes the emotional center of this story. Jay is not caring for a symbol. He is caring for a woman who once stood firmly in the world, who had ideas, causes, and strength of her own. Dementia does not only hurt because it changes daily life. It hurts because it attacks identity. It makes the strongest people seem unreachable. It turns biography into fragments. And for the people who love them, every small decline feels like watching history disappear from inside a living person. That is why Jay's devotion is not just sentimental. It is a form of resistance. He is resisting the disease by refusing to let Mavis become only her diagnosis. He is resisting Hollywood's replacement culture by refusing to treat marriage like a contract that expires when comfort ends. He is resisting the public's hunger for drama by choosing a quieter story, duty. Not duty as cold obligation, but duty as the last architecture of love when emotion alone is not enough to carry the weight. Anyone can love the glamorous version of a person. Anyone can love the woman in the photograph, the partner at the event, the sharp mind across the dinner table, the person who remembers every inside joke. But what happens when memory breaks? What happens when a relationship becomes asymmetrical? What happens when one person has to remember for two? That is the terrifying math Jay Leno is living now. A marriage can begin with two people building a shared life, but dementia slowly rearranges that equation. The caregiver becomes witness, protector, translator, historian. He must remember who she was, who they were, what mattered, what promises were made, what dignity must be defended even when she may not be able to defend herself. This is why legal conservatorship is such a heavy word. To outsiders, it sounds administrative, documents, court approval. estate management, medical decisions. But emotionally, it is much darker. It means a private reality has reached the point where love must also become legal responsibility. It means a husband is not only holding a hand, he is holding the structure of a life together. And this is where the Jay Leno story becomes more than celebrity news. It becomes a mirror, because modern culture is very good at celebrating romance, but very uncomfortable with caregiving. It loves the wedding. It loves the anniversary photo. It loves the viral clip of an old couple dancing. But when love becomes medication schedules, doctor appointments, confusion, legal filings, fatigue, and grief that repeats every morning, the audience gets quiet. People do not know where to look. There's no clean punchline. There's no easy lesson. There's only the brutal question, would you stay when staying no longer looks romantic? Jay Leno's answer seems to be yes. And that yes carries more force because of who he is. He is a man who could have built a different life around wealth, distance, and convenience. He could have hidden behind staff. He could have let representatives speak. He could have protected only the public image and disappeared from the emotional labor. But instead, the story that keeps emerging is a husband still defining himself through his wife. Not through ratings, not through cars, not through nostalgia for The Tonight Show, through Mavis, through the person who knew him before he became a national habit. There's something almost cruelly poetic about that. Jay Leno spent his career helping America forget its troubles for a night. Now his own life is shaped by a disease of forgetting. The man who built punchlines out of yesterday's headlines is now living with the slow disappearance of yesterday itself. The man who once controlled what millions remembered from the news is now fighting to preserve the memory of one woman's life, one marriage, one promise. And perhaps that is why this chapter feels so different from the rest of his career. It does not ask whether Jay was the better host, whether Conan was wronged, whether critics underestimated him, whether his comedy aged well, or whether his car collection defines him. It asks something simpler and more severe. When everything performative is stripped away, does the man still keep his word? For now, the answer is standing there in plain sight. Jay Leno is not delivering this part of his life from behind a desk. He is living it behind closed doors. No applause, no perfect timing, no guaranteed happy ending. Just a man who once made millions laugh, learning that the deepest promise of his life may be fulfilled in moments nobody sees. There is a strange cruelty in the way fame remembers people. It remembers the stage, not the sacrifice. It remembers the headlines, not the hallway outside the doctor's office. It remembers Jay Leno as the man who stood under studio lights, delivered jokes, smiled through ratings pressure, and turned late-night television into a nightly machine. But it does not easily remember the private man who goes home when the cameras stop rolling. And now, in this late chapter of his life, that private man has become impossible to ignore. Because Jay Leno's story is no longer about who won late night. It is about who stays when there is nothing left to win. For years, Jay's reputation was built on work. He was the comic who did not stop. Even when he had The Tonight Show, he kept performing stand-up, kept traveling, kept chasing rooms, kept testing jokes in front of real people. That discipline became part of his mythology. Some stars become powerful by being rare. Jay became powerful by being constant. He seemed to believe that if you kept showing up, the world eventually had to respect you. But caregiving demands a different kind of showing up. It is not glamorous endurance. It is not applause-driven stamina. It is not the thrill of killing a crowd with a perfect line. It is quieter, heavier, and far less forgiving. It asks a person to return, again and again, to a reality that cannot be fixed by talent. That may be the hardest part for someone like Jay. Comedians are problem solvers. They take tension, rearrange it, and release it as laughter. They turn pain into timing. They turn embarrassment into rhythm. They turn fear into a joke people can survive. But dementia resists that process. It cannot be rewritten into a clean story. It cannot be defeated with charisma. It cannot be negotiated with, charmed, or outworked. A man can own every classic car he ever dreamed of, but he cannot rebuild memory like an engine. He could diagnose a mechanical failure, replace a part, polish the frame, bring a machine back to life. But the human mind is not a machine in a garage. And when it begins to change, love has to accept what skill cannot repair. That contrast cuts deeply into Jay's public image. The garage was always his kingdom of control. In that world, age could be respected, damage could be repaired, history could be preserved through patience and craftsmanship. A forgotten car could be found, restored, and given a second life. But with Mavis's illness, Jay is facing a kind of loss that restoration cannot solve. There is no part to order, no manual to consult, no triumphant reveal at the end. There is only care. There is only adaptation. There is only the painful humility of understanding that love does not always save by curing. Sometimes love saves by protecting dignity while the person changes. And dignity is the word at the center of this story. Not scandal, not shock, dignity. When someone develops dementia, the world can begin to talk around them, over them, about them, as if the diagnosis has replaced the person. Jay's role, whether he says it dramatically or not, is to protect Mavis from that disappearance, to make sure she is not reduced to a headline, not turned into a tragic accessory, not treated as a problem to be managed from a distance. He is preserving the meaning of her life when she may not be able to narrate it herself. That is not just caregiving. That is guardianship of identity. This is why the public reaction matters. People call it heartbreaking because it is, but it is also revealing. It reveals how low the expectation has become. When a husband staying with his ill wife becomes a shocking story, something about the culture has already confessed. We are surrounded by language about love, loyalty, soulmates, forever, and family. But the moment love becomes inconvenient, expensive, repetitive, and physically draining, many people quietly expect exit. They do not always say it cruelly. Sometimes they disguise it as practicality. Sometimes they say, "You still have a life." Sometimes they say, "She would want you to be happy." Sometimes they say, "You deserve companionship." But behind those words is the assumption that illness can demote a marriage into memory. Jay's answer rejects that assumption. He is not pretending the situation is easy. That would be dishonest. Dementia does not only affect the patient. It restructures the life of everyone nearby. It changes routines, homes, finances, emotions, conversations, friendships, and futures. It creates a grief that is difficult to explain because the person is still there, yet parts of the shared life are slipping away. Caregivers often mourn in silence because they feel guilty naming their grief while their loved one is still alive. They lose pieces of the relationship before they lose the person. They become tired, then ashamed of being tired. They become lonely, then ashamed of being lonely. They become afraid of what comes next, then ashamed of fearing it. Jay Leno, for all his fame, is not immune to that human cost. But perhaps this is where his old discipline matters. The same habit that made him show up to club after club, year after year, may now be serving a deeper purpose. He knows how to keep going when repetition becomes the job. He knows how to do the work when no one understands the work. He knows how to carry a routine. Yet now the routine is not for applause. It is for Mavis. And that changes everything. The audience may remember Jay Leno as a late-night host, but Mavis receives something more important. The daily proof that she was not abandoned when life became difficult. That is the real emotional explosion behind this story. Not that something crazy happened to Jay Leno in public, but that something rare is happening in private. A man who spent his life making jokes is now offering a serious answer to a culture that treats permanence like weakness. He is saying, without speeches and without melodrama, that love is not only what you feel when life is easy. Love is what remains when ease is gone. And in the end, that may be the one performance of Jay Leno's life that matters most, precisely because it is not a performance at all. But there is another layer to this story that makes it even more painful. Jay Leno is not only fighting the decline of Mavis's memory, he is also fighting the way the public memory treats him. Because for years, Jay was not remembered gently. He was remembered through conflict, through the shadow of Johnny Carson, through the late-night succession wars, through the Conan O'Brien controversy, through the accusation that he was too safe, too corporate, too eager to keep the throne. In the court of public opinion, Jay Leno was often reduced to a punchline about ambition. People debated whether he was loyal, whether he was ruthless, whether he played the game too well. And now, decades later, the final evidence of his character is emerging not from a television contract, not from a network decision, not from a backstage rivalry, but from a bedroom, a doctor's visit, a legal filing, a marriage that has become a test of the soul. That contrast is almost unbearable. The world spent years judging Jay Leno by the politics of late-night television, but life has placed him inside a much older and more serious politics, the politics of care. Who gets protected when power fades? Who gets remembered when memory fails? Who stays when love becomes labor? These are not entertainment questions. They are human questions. And Jay's answer does not erase every debate about his career, but complicates the image. It forces people to see that a man can be ambitious on television and still deeply faithful in marriage. He can be competitive in business and still tender in private. He can be imperfect in one arena and honorable in another. That is what celebrity culture often refuses to allow. It wants one clean label: villain, hero, has been, legend, winner, loser. But real lives are not edited that neatly. Jay Leno's life has always contained that contradiction. He was famous, but he did not live like the kind of celebrity who seemed desperate to be worshipped. He collected cars instead of scandals. He worked clubs instead of building a mythology of mystery. He stayed married to the same woman while an industry around him repeatedly treated relationships like temporary publicity arrangements. He made millions laugh, but never seemed to need the public to believe he was profound. And perhaps that is why this chapter feels so startling. The depth was always there, but it was hidden behind the ordinary costume of a man who wanted people to laugh and then go home. Now the costume is gone. The laughter is still part of his identity, but it is no longer enough to define him. The old image of Jay as the tireless comic has become the image of Jay as the tireless caregiver. And there is a dark symmetry in that transformation. On television, he once carried America's exhaustion at the end of the day, turning bad news into jokes so people could sleep. At home, he now carries a more intimate exhaustion, the kind that comes from protecting someone who cannot fully protect herself. One role was public, rewarded, broadcast, monetized. The other is private, repetitive, emotionally expensive, and often unseen. Yet the private role may reveal more about him than the public one ever did. That is why the crazy event in Jay Leno's life is not a single incident. It is a revelation. It is the revelation that fame can disappear, influence can fade, critics can rewrite your legacy, and still the most important question remains untouched. Did you keep faith with the person who trusted you? In Jay's case, that person is Mavis. Not the audience, not NBC, not the critics, not the fans who loved him or the viewers who turned against him. Mavis, the woman who shared the private years, the ordinary mornings, the off-camera life. The woman who knew the version of Jay no monologue could fully show. And when dementia enters a marriage, that private archive becomes sacred. Every couple has a hidden language, stories no one else knows, jokes no one else understands, small rituals that outsiders would miss. Dementia threatens that language. It breaks the bridge between present and past. It turns shared memory into something one person may have to carry alone. So when Jay stays, he is not only staying beside a person, he is staying beside a history. He is saying that the marriage still exists, even when parts of it can no longer be spoken back to him in the same way. That is a brutal kind of love, because it asks for devotion without equal return. But it is also the purest test of whether a vow was real. For viewers, this story lands hard because it strips away fantasy. We like to imagine that love in old age is soft music, warm lighting, and hands held on a porch. Sometimes it is. But often, love in old age is paperwork, fear, medication, confusion, and a spouse learning how to become both partner and protector. It is not the love Hollywood sells. It is the love Hollywood usually cuts away from. There is no glamorous montage for the caregiver who repeats instructions calmly. No award show for the husband who rearranges his life around safety. No applause for the wife who once fought for causes and now needs someone to fight for her dignity. Yet this is where love becomes real enough to hurt. Jay Leno may never be able to turn this chapter into a clean joke, and maybe he should not. Some things should remain heavy. Some things should resist entertainment. But the strange truth is that this painful chapter may become the part of his legacy that survives the longest. The ratings will become trivia. The late-night feud will become media history. The car collection will become a curiosity. But the image of Jay staying with Mavis, refusing to treat illness as permission to leave, may outlast all of it. Because in the end, people do not only remember who made them laugh. They remember who showed them what loyalty looks like when nobody is laughing. What makes Jay Leno's situation even more haunting is that it forces the audience to confront a truth most people avoid until life gives them no choice. Love is not proven in the beginning. It is proven at the end, when beauty changes, when memory weakens, when the future shrinks, when the person beside you needs protection more than admiration. In youth, love can feel like a promise made under bright lights. In sickness, love becomes a promise tested in dim rooms, in quiet routines, in moments where nobody is watching and nobody can reward you for doing the right thing. That is why Jay's devotion to Mavis feels so powerful. It does not look like celebrity romance. It looks like something older, heavier, and far more difficult: commitment without applause. For decades, Jay Leno understood applause better than almost anyone. He knew how to enter a room, take its temperature, and earn its laughter. He knew how to survive criticism by working harder. He knew how to turn repetition into mastery. But now he is living a kind of repetition that cannot be mastered, only endured. Dementia does not give clean victories. There may be good days, gentle moments, flashes of recognition, small fragments of the person who once seemed fully present. Then there may be hard days, confusion, sadness, distance, and the terrible feeling that the person you love is both there and not there in the same breath. For a spouse, that is an emotional wound with no simple language. You are not grieving one event. You are grieving a slow unfolding. You are losing pieces while still holding the whole person in your arms. That is the private battlefield Jay now occupies. It is not dramatic in the way tabloids understand drama, but it is more dramatic than any scandal. Because scandal is noisy and usually temporary. Caregiving is quiet and relentless. Scandal gives people villains and heroes. Caregiving gives them exhaustion, guilt, patience, fear, tenderness, and responsibility all mixed together. Scandal can be explained in headlines. Caregiving can barely be explained even by those living it. And perhaps that is why this story has touched people so deeply. It is not really about Jay Leno alone. It is about every family that has watched dementia enter the home like a fog. It is about every spouse who has had to become the memory keeper. It is about every adult child, every caregiver, every person who has wondered how much strength love can demand before it breaks. Jay's answer seems to be that love does not always feel strong. Sometimes it simply refuses to leave. That is an important distinction. The public often imagines loyalty as heroic energy, as if a devoted husband wakes up every day filled with certainty. Real loyalty is often more fragile than that. It may include sadness. It may include fatigue. It may include moments of private fear. It may include the painful awareness that the life you planned has been replaced by a life you must learn to accept. But loyalty continues anyway. It keeps the appointment. It signs the forms. It protects the person's dignity. It chooses patience again after patience has already been exhausted. It does not require the caregiver to be superhuman. It requires them to remain human when the situation is trying to hollow them out. And this is where Jay Leno's public persona becomes unexpectedly moving. The man America knew was never built around emotional confession. He was not the celebrity who constantly asked the public to witness his pain. He was practical, mechanical, routine-driven. He loved cars because cars could be understood. Engines had logic. Parts had purpose. Problems had causes. Repairs had sequence. But now he is facing a condition that refuses that kind of logic. There is no simple diagnostic chart that can restore the woman he loves to the way she was before. There is no replacement part for memory. There is no perfect repair for time. In that sense, Mavis's illness has placed Jay in the one kind of story his old tools cannot solve. He cannot fix this. He can only stay. That may be the deepest form of humility. To love someone through dementia is to accept that presence may matter more than solutions. It is to understand that you cannot always bring back what disease has taken, but you can still create safety. You can still create tenderness. You can still make sure the person is not alone inside the confusion. You can still speak to them as someone with a full life, not as a diagnosis. You can still honor the version of them that the world knew and the version standing before you now. That is not a small thing. That is the work of preserving humanity when illness tries to reduce it. The public may call this heartbreaking, and it is. But it is also strangely beautiful because it shows a kind of love that does not depend on performance. Jay does not need Mavis to remember every detail for the marriage to matter. He remembers. He carries the archive. He holds the story. He protects the meaning of their life together. And perhaps that is what vows were always supposed to mean. Not that two people will remain unchanged forever, but that when change becomes cruel, one person will not abandon the other to it. So when people ask what crazy thing happened to Jay Leno, maybe the answer is this. Life finally pulled him away from the stage and placed him before the only audience that matters now. One person, one promise, one long goodbye being met with loyalty. The joke machine has stopped. The applause has faded. The old battles are irrelevant. What remains is a husband beside his wife, proving that the most powerful act of his life may not be making America laugh, but refusing to walk away when laughter is no longer enough. There comes a point in every public life when the story stops belonging to the crowd and returns to the person who lived it. Jay Leno has reached that point. For decades, America treated him like a familiar object in the room. The host after the news, the comedian with the headline jokes, the car guy, the survivor of late-night wars, the man who seemed too ordinary to break. But now, at this late stage, the public image has been stripped down to something far more serious. Jay is no longer being measured by ratings. He is being measured by endurance. Not the endurance of a performer who can do another set, another interview, another monologue, but the endurance of a husband who has to wake up each morning and face a grief that does not announce itself all at once. That is what makes dementia so cruel. It does not always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it arrives like a shadow moving slowly across a room. At first, there may be small forgetfulness, small confusion, moments that can be explained away by age, stress, or distraction. Then the pattern becomes harder to deny. The person you love begins to drift from shared certainty into a private fog. The marriage does not end, but the rules of the marriage change. The conversations change. The balance changes. The future changes. And the caregiver is left in a strange emotional country where love is still alive, but the map has been torn apart. For Jay, that country must feel especially lonely because his entire career was built in public rhythm. He knew where to stand, when to speak, when to pause, when to let the band rescue the moment. But in this chapter, there is no cue. No one tells you how to react when your wife cannot meet you in the same memory. No one gives you a script for becoming both spouse and guardian. No one teaches you how to mourn without making the person you love feel like a burden. And yet, somehow, Jay has chosen the simplest and hardest answer. He remains. The tragedy is not only that Mavis is ill. The tragedy is that a life once shared equally now requires one person to hold more of its weight. But the beauty is that Jay appears willing to hold it. That does not make him perfect. It does not turn him into a saint. It makes him something more believable, a man trying to honor a promise under impossible conditions. And maybe that is why people react so strongly. They see in him not a celebrity fantasy, but a fear close to their own homes. They see their parents, their grandparents, their spouses, themselves. They see the terrifying question nobody wants to ask too early. What happens when love outlives memory? Jay's answer is not philosophical. It is practical. You protect. You stay close. You make decisions when decisions must be made. You defend dignity. You refuse to let the illness become the only story. That last point matters most. Mavis Leno is not dementia. She is a woman with history, conviction, marriage, activism, humor, and decades of life before this diagnosis. If Jay's public devotion has any deeper meaning, it is this. He is reminding the world not to erase her while she is still here. He is insisting, quietly, that the person remains even when the disease becomes visible. And perhaps that is the real final test for anyone who loves someone through decline. Can you still see them? Can you still speak to the whole person, not only the symptoms? Can you still remember the force they once were without resenting the care they now need? Can you keep tenderness alive when the relationship no longer gives back in the way it once did? These questions are brutal because they expose the difference between affection and commitment. Affection enjoys the person when they are easy to enjoy. Commitment protects the person when enjoyment is no longer the center of the relationship. This is why Jay Leno's story has become unexpectedly larger than entertainment. It touches something moral. In a culture where people are often valued by usefulness, beauty, productivity, and memory, dementia threatens to make a person invisible. The patient becomes the condition. The caregiver becomes the strong one. The marriage becomes the sad story. But inside that simplified version is a far more complex reality. Fear, tenderness, irritation, patience, loyalty, exhaustion, and love still trying to speak. Jay is living inside that complexity now, and for once, the clean late-night joke cannot rescue anyone from it. Yet there is something powerful in the fact that he is still known as Jay Leno, the man who made people laugh. Because laughter, at its best, is not the opposite of sorrow. It is one of the ways humans survive sorrow. Maybe Jay's career was always preparing him for this in ways nobody could have predicted. Comedy taught him repetition. It taught him resilience. It taught him how to enter difficult rooms. It taught him how to keep moving when the last joke failed. But caregiving asks for more than resilience. It asks for surrender. It asks a person to admit that not every pain can be converted into material. Some pain must simply be carried. And that is where the story becomes quiet again. Not weak, quiet. Jay Leno's greatest act may never be televised. It may happen in ordinary rooms, in small gestures, in patient answers, in decisions made for Mavis's comfort and safety, in the daily discipline of staying close to someone who once stood beside him in a different way. The world may continue looking for a shocking headline, but the real headline is not loud at all. It is this: Jay Leno kept his promise. And in the end, after all the fame, after all the jokes, after all the noise, that may be the only line that truly matters. And maybe this is where Jay Leno's story leaves the world with something heavier than sympathy. It leaves a question, not about fame, not about late-night television, not about who was right or wrong in the old battles, but about what a person becomes when the applause is gone. Jay spent a lifetime making people laugh at the chaos of the world. He took headlines, scandals, politics, celebrity disasters, and daily anxiety, then turned them into something ordinary people could survive before going to bed. But now, the chaos is not on a cue card. It is inside his home. It is inside the slow uncertainty of illness. It is inside the painful transformation of a marriage that still exists, even when memory itself has begun to betray it. That is why this chapter feels like the final, unscripted monologue of Jay Leno's life. Not because his life is over, but because the performance is. There is no need to win the room anymore. No need to prove he is funnier, sharper, tougher, more durable than the next man. The contest has changed. The audience has changed. The stakes have changed. Now, the measure is not laughter. It is loyalty. It is whether one human being can remain faithful to another when the relationship no longer looks the way the world expects love to look. Mavis Leno may not be able to stand in public beside Jay the way she once did, but her presence still defines this story. In many ways, she is the center of it, not as a symbol of sadness, but as the person Jay is refusing to let disappear. That refusal is powerful. Dementia tries to shrink a person into symptoms. Jay's devotion pushes back. It says, "She is still my wife, still my partner, still the woman whose life matters, still the person I chose before the cameras and after them." That kind of love is not flashy. It is not easy to package, but it is more enduring than celebrity itself. The world once knew Jay Leno for his jokes. Maybe now it will remember him for something quieter, staying when leaving would have been easier, staying when the role became harder, staying when people, unbelievably, asked whether he would simply move on. And that is the heartbreaking truth behind the headline. Something crazy did happen to Jay Leno. Life asked him whether his vows were real. And in the silence after the laughter, he answered yes.